Welcome back to the Wolverine Confidential, your Michigan sports podcast. I'm your host, Eli Zink, a producer here at MLive.
I'm Kahn, Michigan basketball beat writer.
I'm McMann, MLive Michigan football beat writer.
So today we're going to talk about Michigan's chances at the Ncaa tournament and their possible path to the Final Four. Then we're going to jump to football a little later on and talk Calvin Anderson, Mo Hurst, and possibly the unreleased Amazon documentary. So it's a lot of people's favorite time of the year. The Ncaa, certainly, it's their favorite time of the year. They get to make the big bucks. Andrew, what's going on with the tournament and Michigan as they look forward to this weekend?
Well, I love this time of year. Thursday and Friday are the two best days of the year for me every year. Even Selection Sunday has this weird appeal to me, even though there are no games. It's still just seeing what the bracket is going to look like. It just brings us joy. I mean, I've since like third grade, I was sneaking headphones into class to listen on the radio.
I would get real irritated when my elementary or middle school teachers wouldn't put the games on. Though Michigan was never in it, and I was a Michigan fan growing up.
Yeah.
I was like, come on, it's the tournament. It's the most glorious time of the year.
Yeah, no, it's just, I mean, in high school one year there was somebody called in a bomb threat on that first Thursday, and a large chunk of the student population assumed it was me because of my love for the tournament. It was not.
I can remember my fifth grade teacher coming in. When I was in fifth grade, we had a morning teacher and an afternoon teacher. So the morning teacher, he was off in the afternoon, but he was still in the classroom. So he would come in. We both had a mutual love of college basketball. So he would literally come in and sneak in and tell me scores, like whisper in my ear while the other teacher was teaching. So
yeah.
I think everyone has a March Madness story to say.
I used to sign out. You had to go to the bathroom in like fifth grade. You had to sign out, and at the end of the day, the teacher would be like, "Why is your name on there like 18 times?"
Right. Imagine having a smartphone. Like now, kids nowadays, I would have the book set up, smartphone right there.
You could actually live stream the games. Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, Michigan is in.
They're in.
They're a 3 seed, going to Wichita, Kansas, to play the Montana Grizzlies. And yeah, they're in the West region. Which would take them to Los Angeles possibly if they advance through the first weekend. And yeah, I think they've got a chance to get there. My whole thing is like, it's very hard to win this whole thing. If that's your goal, there's 67 teams that are going to be disappointed at the end of this thing.
Right.
But I think Michigan can get there. I think every team would need breaks to get to the Final Four. When you're a 3 seed, you expect to win that first game. I was looking, 84% of the time the 3 seed, advances. Any one 3 seed will advance to the next round. But it's just 50% to get to the Sweet 16. Now, Michigan, I think, has put itself in a place where, they're probably a little better than that. Given their matchups there with potentially Houston or San Diego State. Both good teams, both playing well right now. But I think, so is Michigan. So after that, though, I mean, it really becomes a toss-up. You've got potentially North Carolina, probably North Carolina, the 2 seed down there. They already played this year, which I never love when that happens in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
But it's tough. It's tough to avoid last year's matchups and conference matchups and all that.
Right.
So, they lost. They lost that game. I was there, by 15, I think, in Chapel Hill. But Michigan is a much different team now. Now North Carolina has improved too, I'm sure.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's the kind of game. I don't know if you remember 2013 when they went to the national championship. They had that Trey Burke shot against Kansas. You need a game like that.
Right.
You need I don't want to say lucky. You just need a game that could go the other way to go your way. You need a break somewhere along the line.
And you often need a game changer like that. Someone who can do that. Does this team have that game changer? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Wagner certainly could be. It was interesting watching the video clips of Montana's selection show viewing party, and they knew more about Michigan than Michigan's players knew about them already, just because national TV and things like that. One of the players did drop Mo Wagner's name and say we haven't really faced a guy that can shoot from the outside and is that size. So yeah, we knew that he's going to be a matchup problem for teams. So yeah, I think I guess one myth I'd like to debunk is the whole Michigan's defense will allow it to survive a bad shooting night or whatever. I guess that's true, but I also think if you're like a really explosive offensive team, which Michigan has had in the past, that allows you to survive a potentially bad defensive game. I don't see a difference there come tournament play. I think as good as Michigan's defense has been, there have been games where it hasn't been great. So, it's certainly going to take good play on both ends of the floor, should they advance.
Well, like you said, I mean, defense wins championships in so many sports, but in basketball and in the tournament, how often have we seen offense win a championship?
Absolutely.
I mean, you saw even Michigan-Louisville a few years ago. That was offense one half and even better offense the next half from Louisville. So I think that's a great point. And fortunately, Michigan is reasonably balanced. But a lot of these teams that they can face, UNC, you have a team like Virginia who down the line. An amazing defensive team, so it's just you don't know what you're going to get, and you hope to be able to match up with any team well. Michigan itself, though, is such a tough matchup.
They are, exactly. That's the thing. Like, you're going to hear that a lot, and for good reason. I asked Duncan Robinson about this last night. I was like, how come, you kind of hear, like, Michigan, they're so tough to prepare for. Is there some, like, merit to that that's not true of other teams? And basically, he said there is some because of, the way that they run offense and trying to prepare for not... you could have Michigan's playbook, and it wouldn't really make a difference. You have to really see it and study it. The teams that can slow them down are the teams that are in the Big Ten that play them 2-3 times a year.
Right.
So it's a complex offense that helps them, and it's a coach that understands how to get his team ready on a quick turnaround.
I heard an interview last night. I think it was Bill Self, the Kansas coach. He was talking about wanting tape for not only the first round opponent but his second round opponent. How much is Michigan, and maybe, I don't know if the question was brought up or not, but how much is Michigan looking ahead to potentially playing, San Diego State or Houston?
Yes, scouting will begin on those two teams as well. They'll admit that. It's not looking past your current opponent. It's planning for the fact that it's such a quick turnaround. Now, they'll also, when you're in that pod, you're at the same site. They'll be able to scout in person that game. So that'll, they'll be doing that as well, to pick up on sort of tendencies that you just can't maybe see on tape. But yeah, they'll do some preliminary work on them as well. So, and there's some familiarity there with San Diego State. Brian Dutcher is their head coach, first year replacing Steve Fisher, who was there forever. Who was at Michigan for a long time. So there's a connection there. Beeline and Dutcher are friends. Not that if you weren't, you couldn't get the tape, but there's already a familiarity there.
Now, we sort of talked about looking ahead, but what about Montana? Upsets do happen?
They do.
Now, is this something that you think is realistic in this case? We've seen 14 seeds beat 3 seeds, but at the same time, the way these, Montana is not maybe as powerful as some 14 seeds have been in the past, but these matchups can surprise you. It's the tournament. Anything can happen.
Right. I mean, we talked about 2013 when they went to the national championship. The year before that, Michigan got a share of the Big Ten title. They had Trey Burke. He was a freshman. They had Tim Hardaway Jr. They had 2 seniors and Zach Novak and Stu Douglas, who were, very determined to go out on a good note.
Right.
And they laid an egg and lost to Ohio in the first round. Now, Michigan was a 4, which there is a difference between a 3 and a 4 there, but still, they were a big favorite, and they lost in the first round.
Right.
So, I don't know. I find, like, with these 14s and 15s, they kind of come out of nowhere. Like, you look on paper, and it's hard to say, like, which teams are gonna create problems. Sometimes those 10, 11, 12s, you can kind of say, okay, well, they got a guy who's a potential pro. I don't see that with Montana, but I see a lot of juniors and seniors in their lineup. I see a starting lineup that has been the same in every single game this season. There's not too many teams in the country, if any, that could say that. So there's continuity there. And there's a team that's hungry. This is their first NCAA tournament appearance. Definitely happy to be there, but they want to win a game. So I don't know. They don't. I guess if you're a Michigan fan, you're probably you could rest a little bit easier knowing that Montana likes to force turnovers. That's part of their success, and that has just never really worked against a John Beeline team because they don't turn the ball over. They're second in the country in fewest turnovers as far as on a per 40-minute basis. So if that's your plan, that's probably not a recipe for success against Michigan.
So it's a team that's won 26 games. It's not like it's one of these small conference teams that went on a run, maybe had a middling record, and then won their conference tournament. They were
the regular season champs, yeah.
Right. It's not dominant, but they were strong in their division or in their conference. It's a smaller conference.
Yep.
So it could be, and it's a senior or upperclassman laden team. I would look for them to at least stay with Michigan maybe early on, and you might see Michigan pull away. Just knowing that you've seen these types of games happen on a lot of occasions in NCAA tournaments in the past in the seed range. Looking ahead, what do we feel like the biggest roadblocks are, that are in the way for Michigan to reach the Final Four? This is, you have Xavier, you have UNC, there is Gonzaga, and these are talented teams. Obviously, we saw what happened with UNC earlier in the season.
Yeah, I mean, just, in the potential Saturday game, that's like a toss-up to me. I don't know. I'll be publishing my bracket, I guess, here on MLive later this week. I guess I'm leading San Diego State right now, but I've just got some more familiarity with them, so I think that probably lends into it. But Trey Kell, Malik Pope, nice inside-outside duo for them, playing really well. They're a defensive-minded team that'll not make it easy for Michigan, but again, they'll be favored in that game. But yeah, after that, as far as the roadblocks, I mean, I think North Carolina is probably the biggest one. I think that's a bigger one than, should they get past them and facing, like you said, Xavier or Gonzaga or Ohio State potentially. I mean, I think they're a team that's being, overlooked just because of preseason expectations. That being said, I'm not sure the Buckeyes will get out of the first round, but Gonzaga is, they're a team that is 30-4. They went to the national championship last year, and it's like, who's talking about Gonzaga?
Every year, Gonzaga is that team, I feel like.
Yeah, they're really good again. Now, they don't have all the same players from that team last year, but they've got a few. They're really well coached. They're big. So I don't know. That would be interesting. And Xavier, I feel like, is similar, kind of somewhat under the radar. They won the Big East regular season outright. So
at the same time, lost to Villanova by 40 points combined, and
they did right.
That wasn't. I watched that one of those games. Bad look.
Yeah,
bad look
sure.
to lose like that.
No, absolutely. And they're a team that has not, had struggled a bit in the NCAA tournament. I think they broke through to the Elite Eight last year. I think it was maybe Gonzaga that knocked them off there to get to the Final Four, if I'm remembering correctly. So you could have a rematch there. Neither of those games would be tough, but you asked about the biggest roadblock. I think it's North Carolina.
Yeah.
Because we saw them play, and it didn't go well for Michigan. But that was at North Carolina. You had Isaiah Livers not really ready to contribute yet. You had Duncan Robinson and Muhammad Ali Abdur-Rahman combined for 5 points in that game.
Like John Teskey wasn't quite the sort of force that he's become off the bench.
Right.
UNC is a little bit undersized in the front court, and when you have someone that can come off the bench like Teskey, and really, he's a guy that can hit the 15-foot jumper, but he can also bang down low a little bit. He's not the most vertical guy, but that's a big difference, and so that'd be really interesting to see how this Michigan team is developed, and of course UNC is developed, but to see them go head to head would be a really interesting way to see how to sort of, not elite programs, as UNC could probably argue is elite, but how they develop their players over the course of the season, and then how they match up.
That's a great point. And then, Xavier Simpson, there was still sort of point guard situation was still in flux back then, which
very
was,
much so,
hard, and yet now you've got a guy who is just would relish the opportunity to guard a guy like, Joel Berry. So it would be it would be fun. That'd be a really fun matchup. It'd be an interesting one out in LA, North Carolina and Michigan, but it's the NCAA tournament. Sometimes that's how it goes, and
I imagine two fan bases that would travel pretty well for that game.
Travel well, and certainly Michigan alums are out there already.
A lot of alums out there,
So yeah, but I'm looking for, if we go back to the Wichita pod, I have never seen the Kansas Jayhawk Nation in person, so that is going to be an experience for me.
That certainly will be.
They're just going to take over that town, that arena.
I don't doubt it.
That's going to be an experience.
I know it's probably water under the bridge at this point, but was there any disappointment from the Michigan players about not going to Detroit? Or
it's a good question. I was in the room with them, and yes, I mean, absolutely. It was this weird tension because they're in. They know they're in, and yet you could see as it's developing. Oh, okay, because they show the 6-11 matchup first in Detroit, and especially when it was that TCU game. It's like, all right, here we go. And the 3 seed, Michigan State, just a lot of booing. I saw some players do a little booing. Mo Wagner's mom could have come. She's here. Came from New York, came from Germany to New York, has been with her son this week, and would have stayed and gone, but is not going to make the trip now to Wichita.
That's a bummer.
That was, and then obviously just for fans, and I think they look at the fact that hey, we beat Michigan State twice, but it's not just head to head. You got to look at the whole season, and
I saw a quote from one of on the panel, from the tournament panel, who said we look at the entire season and weight it equally.
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting because, yes, it's not as if the first 15 games are the preseason, but at the same time, if you don't factor development or a decline, how can you accurately assess a team?
Right. I mean, I always think of it as like you're playing well now. Well, your advantage is that you're playing well now, and you should, you could advance because of that, as opposed to you should be rewarded with a better seed or whatever. So for Michigan, those 2 wins over Michigan State were 2 quality wins on their resume. That's what it was.
Right.
It wasn't now a determining factor in where they go. And Michigan will, Beeline was looking at the bright side of get away from distractions, and it's all about matchups. I mean, honestly, Bucknell could be a trickier matchup. I think TCU is a better team than either of the teams Michigan would face in the second round, if you want to look at it that way. And then you got Duke as a 2. Maybe you're splitting hairs with them in Carolina, but it's interesting. I mean, it's more about your path than exactly where you're playing, I think.
Right. And I guess that makes sense, but either way, it is good news for Michigan, the number 3 seed in the West.
Yeah.
Now, in less good news, which seems to be the theme for football, Michigan football, which again, it is a basketball school, but we do have to cover football. Mo Hurst and his heart condition, really sad for a really great kid. Hopefully, it can have a positive resolution, but Tell fans who aren't quite aware of what's going on and what's the latest on it.
Yeah, a lot of unanswered questions at this point. He was obviously present at the NFL Combine. It would have been 2 weekends ago in Indianapolis. Went through the the measurements, I guess, so to speak. He went through that stuff. Then he went and did his exams, and it turns out he turned in an irregular EKG, an electrocardiogram. For those of you that don't know what that is, they measure your heart rate and that type of thing. So his heart, he had a fast heart rate. Now, it sounds like he did an interview later that day, I believe it was, with the NFL Network, saying this came up at Michigan. Obviously, I've reached out to Michigan. They're not commenting, citing HIPAA laws. They said basically you need to go through Mo or his agent to get the response. But it sounds like this is something that's come up in the past. I'm not, and that's where the questions come in. Who let him play? How was it determined? Who made the determination? All that stuff. I had an interaction actually on this past Sunday with Mo. I'll get to that in a minute. But there are a lot of questions and things stemming off of this that could jeopardize Mo's potential NFL future. I mean, this is something that's come up in the past. It could potentially end his NFL career if it's deemed like serious enough. Whether it's a decision Mo makes on his own, thinking he doesn't want to risk his health and his heart, or it could be a situation where an NFL teams decide not to risk it on him and take him in the NFL draft. Right now, he's eligible for the NFL draft. I think he anticipates going through it. But he was supposed to go through further tests this week. We don't have answers on those at this point. He is anticipated to be at Michigan's Pro Day, which is next Friday, March 23rd. He told us he's going to talk to the media then, and I guess this gets into my interaction with him on Sunday. He had an autograph signing out in Livonia at the Cards and Memorabilia shop in the mall.
They still have those.
They do, yeah. And the line was
nice.
out the door. It was him, Mike McRae, and Mason Cole. They brought in all 3, all potential NFL draft selections. Line was, I talked to the lady that counted his signatures. Mo signed, I think, 234 signatures on Sunday. So he made some cash. He had some fans show up and everything else. But as a media member, you get there early to just kind of check out the situation, see what's going on. I waited probably around 2 hours waiting there to talk to him, and then he finished his signing, and then he tells me that he can't do media interviews. His agent has advised him not to, but he'll talk at Pro Day. So we anticipate hearing from him next week. He was supposed to go through further tests this week on his heart, further EKGs. If those come back clear, then I suppose he's good to go. That's what it sounded like happened at Michigan. Obviously, we don't have the answers because Mo isn't talking and Michigan isn't talking. But it's a serious situation. It's one that from his perspective, you want him to stay healthy, not risk his life for something that it could or could not work out. So it's a decision he's going to have to make, whether or not he wants to continue or not, and then the NFL teams are going to go from there. It's a dicey situation. It's unfortunate. I hope he gets through it for his sake, but it's a kind of a wait and see thing too.
A really sad situation, and You sort of have to wonder what it is, because if he was able to play, for 4 years and play at a really standout level, you want to see him do well. He was a projected up to some point even a top 20 pick in some boards, and it's really a sad story. But we hope that hopefully the best can work out for Mo, and we'll certainly have everyone updated on that story as it develops. And we appreciate you going out there and waiting around. And
did you buy a pack of baseball cards or something?
No, I didn't get anything. The owner was fantastic. He probably could have, in theory, kicked us out because we were just kind of loitering in the store waiting, But he was fantastic and great. Didn't buy anything, but to Mo's credit, he was nice about it, But he wasn't talking, so he got out of it.
So in other news, Calvin Anderson finally trimmed his list
to one.
To one, yes. We were waiting for that. We found out where he's going. He's going to Texas.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. He's from Austin, Texas, so he's staying home. Now he did say, proximity necessarily wasn't going to be a determining factor. I guess I want to buy that, but at the same token, I think that does come into it to some degree.
Right.
He did say he wants to play in the NFL. He's got 1 year remaining, so he's going to go to a program he feels like is going to get him best ready for the NFL. I think Michigan would have done that. I think Texas would have done that. I really think Oklahoma and Auburn too. So they're all in the same level. He did say at one point Michigan and Texas were the top two. But I just had this hunch from the get-go that Texas was going to be the spot. He played 3 years at Rice, not far from his home.
Right.
He sounds like he's been in Texas his whole life. So for him to make that jump and that leap to go to the Midwest, to Michigan, to basically an unknown in terms of what they're going to have from the offensive line standpoint, what they're going to be doing at quarterback.
Right.
They haven't announced an offensive coordinator yet. There's so many unanswered questions. So it's like from his perspective, I think he looked at Texas and it was probably more of a secure, stable environment, and that's where he ended up.
Right. A lineman's always going to be judged. The scouts are going to judge him individually, but as a unit.
Right.
So to go somewhere where there's a little more
up in the
certainty.
Air. Yeah,
and the coaching, the fact that Michigan's offensive line coach was in flux during this, you have to look at the timeline.
Yeah, and the weird thing is,
surprising.
He did an interview with WTKA with Sam Webb the other day, last week before his announcement, and he brought up Tim Drevno, and Drevno was one of the guys that was recruiting him pretty heavily. When Michigan extended its scholarship to Anderson in January, it was Harbaugh and Tim Drevno that went down there to meet him and offered him. Well, Drevno's gone; he resigned. So I think that came into play to some degree too. Calvin Anderson did cite Matt Dudek, who's Michigan's recruiting director. He's not an official coach, but he did say he had a really good relationship with Matt. I think Matt was involved in that recruiting process. But when your offensive line coach, the offensive coordinator, and the guy that was with the head coach offering you a scholarship is no longer at the school, I think that came into play too.
Yeah, that makes sense. You don't want to go somewhere where everything's up in the air. And right now, everything for Michigan has been up in the air. There's been a lot of question marks. The whole recruiting cycle of 2017 to 2018 did not go as well as the previous 2 years, which is a reflection of the results on the field.
Yeah.
Speaking of on the field, what are they going to do at left tackle? We talked about some options before the show, and they have some. And we did say their interior looks set.
Yeah.
They got a lot of great interior linemen. Could be one of the best in the Big Ten, but those tackles, two big question marks.
Big question marks. You've got, and I've written this several times, there are options. There are bodies there. Michigan has plenty of depth. It's just finding the right guy to play. That they don't have a ton of experience on either end. Specific to left tackle, you've got a couple options. Grant Newsome is, in theory, could be eligible to play and healthy. He was a guy that played. He started, I think, 10 games 2 years ago as a redshirt freshman. He had a serious knee injury in 2016. Sat out all of 2017. It's going to be a doctor's decision whether or not he can play or not. But even if he is ruled eligible, I don't know how you can come back from something like that.
Well, that's what we've talked about. I think I'm seeing a lot of people talk about the fact that Grant Newsome could be healthy, and then so that problem will be solved. But how do we know that, and props to him for an amazing recovery if he is cleared. However, does he come back with the same mobility? And a left tackle needs to be incredibly mobile. Maybe he goes to right tackle. Not that a right tackle doesn't need to be mobile.
Right.
But that is a big question mark. It was a significant injury, and Michigan fans ought to hope he's back to form. But to expect that he will be, just as he was before the injury, might be wishful thinking.
Yeah, and if Newsome isn't there, and like you mentioned, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't end up being there. Michigan does have options. You know, there's been suggestions of moving Ben Bredesen from left guard to left tackle. He could, in theory, do it. Tim Drevno, in fact, said that during bowl prep, during the Outback Bowl prep. He said we could, in theory, move Ben Bredesen if we needed to. But he was a consistent starter at guard, so I don't know if that's going to happen. But then even behind Bredesen, you've got several options. Juwan Bushell-Beatty and Nolan Ulizio both started at right tackle. You can, in theory, move one of them. I think Bushell-Beatty's maybe a little bit more athletic than Ulizio. But then they've got a host of redshirt freshmen and sophomores that didn't play much at all last year, at all, period.
Right. And it's hard to glean what's going on behind the scenes because, clearly they don't want to put too much pressure on one guy who hasn't even seen the field yet. But where is most of the buzz coming from if we look at the past 6 months?
A couple guys. I mean, there's a long list of guys, but two really. I mean, James Hudson's an option. Chuck Filiaga is a guy that's been brought up time and time again. He was a 4-star recruit. He was heavily recruited out of high school, heavily touted. Didn't hear much about him last year because he just didn't play. He wasn't in the rotation, so to speak. But the spring and the fall are going to be key, I think, for development with these young guys. Somebody has to emerge. Somebody's going to need to get better. I think the fact that Michigan has a new offensive line coach, Ed Warner, who's by all accounts a very good offensive line coach, they're going to have to develop somebody. They're going to have to get somebody to step up and emerge. Who that is remains to be seen. I think that's going to be the thing to watch here in spring.
So these questions are going to be answered very soon. Can't believe it. Spring practice is already on us.
A week from Friday.
Yeah. So we're going to have a lot more info on that.
We're taking your buzz.
Yeah.
Football is taking the buzz back.
I just buzz. I just want more buzz.
Right.
That's all.
That's all we want.
Yeah, it's not.
So as we go forward, there's a lot of news coming out. Next week we'll obviously talk a lot about the NCAA tournament and how Michigan fared this weekend.
There'll be 16 teams left only.
Yes.
Which, wow.
Yeah, I know,
That's
right?
just, yeah.
It's going to be rapid fire.
Yeah,
So lots of
fun
Michigan
time.
news coming out. We got the spring game, spring practice, and then eventually the spring game. A little farther down the line. We'll be covering a lot of that next week. So stay tuned with us. This is Wolverine Confidential, and thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you next week.